Okay, check. So, yeah, there, I'm on. Does somebody want to go hint to Jeremy and the group of people oh, there he is, he's back. Everyone, so wow, we've dropped off in attendance a little bit here this morning. That's what we get for our 8 a.m. start. So thanks very much to everybody for getting up early and coming here. So today's agenda looks like this. For the next 45 minutes or so, we are going to talk about success metrics for the organization. I will, at the end of that, hand off to Peter, and Peter will introduce Kim Little, who will take us through the discussion of options for transition to a self-sustaining organization. After we wrap up that discussion, and by the way, that, of course, that activity will be ongoing throughout the summer, and you'll be getting updates as it goes on. After that's over, I'll come back and I'll introduce Colin Suter, who will be taking us through a discussion of terminology. And I'll warn in advance that discussions of terminology in organizations like this are prefabricated rat holes, and so I don't want to get into any kind of endless dialogue about any particular term. What I do want to do is talk about the objectives of working on terminology, go through a little bit of what's been done, and then encourage everybody who wants to hash out the details to do that in the committee where it's being worked on. Then we'll have a break. Dayon is again sponsoring the coffee today. Coffee is already out there. Thank you, Dayon. We will have committee breakouts after the coffee break. And committee breakouts are going to go until 2:30. There'll be a lunch break during the committee breakouts. At 2:30, Jim Elstey will give a report, an update from the Privacy Committee. And at that point, unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave you because I've got an obligation, a family obligation back home. So after we come back from the break that follows that session, Daza, our vice chair, will perform the first of his official vice chairing obligations here at the plenary, and he will do the wrap-up, and we'll have remarks from Peter and Jeremy, and we'll have a discussion of how we go forward, including the logistics for the next meeting. That will end at 4. And at 4 also we'll begin the meeting of the Management Council. Anybody have any questions or comments about the agenda? Okay, in that case, let's get started. So, as we go forward, we're going to need to be able, both for our own purposes and for external consumption, to be able to evaluate how we're progressing as an organization. And there are multiple dimensions along which we're going to have to assess ourselves. One is obviously whether we are proceeding through our list of deliverables that we're going to create and adopt in a timely fashion. But there are potentially lots of other criteria against which we would like to be able to measure ourselves. And I want some of these metrics to be, and by the way, I want us to track them formally. And so, in the Management Council, I expect at Management Council meetings we will periodically be having discussions of how we're proceeding against the criteria. But I would like some of the criteria, at least, to be the sorts of things that will give us, from time to time, something that we can announce to the public and use as evidence that we're making progress. So Kay will be taking notes on the screen as we go through the discussion. And we'll finish this discussion in the Management Council and put together a formal set of metrics and a tracking sheet that we'll use. But I wanted to open this up to the plenary and allow people to give us input on what you all think are going to be the important criteria for making the organization successful. By the way, do we have a microphone and a mic runner so that people can actually execute this part of the... Okay, yes, we do. I realize it's 8 o'clock in the morning, but you have to put your hand up in the air and say something. We have a volunteer. David Temeshaw. Just a minute, Kalia also. I think David was there first. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, point of order here.
Well, more like an offering. Perhaps since it is 8 in the morning, we might invite people to talk at their small tables for like 5 minutes, and so they could think out loud about it with each other, and then we could share, like not very long, just like 5 minutes, talk at your tables. Success.
Okay, I actually think that's a good suggestion, so we'll do that, but I'll first, since David already had his hand up, I'll call on David to say what he wanted to say.
Okay. To start, yesterday, Paul Laurent gave a presentation of the work planning subcommittee of the Management Council and identified 5 priority areas to 5 priority activities to be targeted for completion by the end of calendar year 2013. Those were to establish and implement an IDESG self-sustainment plan, establish and implement an IDESG accreditation and trust mark program, establish defined liaison relationships with external organizations as necessary and appropriate, implement IDESG accreditation program for at least 2 of the pilots that were presented yesterday, and establish and implement the identity ecosystem framework development and adoption process. Now, Peter Brown indicated that the work plan committee had also presented a number of task items in order to carry those high priority work activities forward. So it's kind of as a starting place for metrics and measures of success, at least for the short term. Those were intended to be short-term measures of success for the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group.
Yeah, right. Thank you, David. So certainly, Kay, for your transcript here, one of the items, and sort of the obvious and most explicit item that we measure should be timely achievement of the milestones on the work plan. And by the way, I'll say that the work plan, the specifics of the work plan that David enumerated should be treated for the moment as provisional, because they haven't yet been discussed and adopted by the Management Council, but as amended. So finish the items in the work plan in a timely way is clearly going to be one of our metrics. So I think Kalia's suggestion is good. So at each of your tables, why don't you have a very short conversation? I'll time it for 5 minutes about what you think other success metrics ought to be, and after the end of that 5 minutes, I will interrupt you on the microphone and ask you to raise your hands. Start now. Where did my timer go?
Calibrate your chronometer. Sorry, I was a bit late.
Oh, no worries.
Any gaps needing filling?
No, but I will need you to start moderating the meeting at 2:30.
Good. And Kay and I have started coordinating on that, so I'm feeling good about that.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Kay and I have already started coordinating in terms of scripting and smooth transition.
Okay, fabulous.
Terrific.
I thought I could give a copy to Daz.
Yeah, you totally should, yeah.
As usual, like ahead of us. Ahead of planning. Thank you.
But do what? Oh, yeah, absolutely. 1 minute, folks. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's now go to the part of the exercise where we resume one meeting and talk to each other toward the chair. So, Daza, if you could pick up the microphone again. So first of all, thanks, Kalia, for the suggestion. I think that was very helpful, and it seems like people are awake now. So is there someone else who has something other than David, based on your conversations, that you would like to suggest? Don't all talk at once, literally, in both senses. Okay, we have, and don't forget to, for the benefit of the remote audience, state your name and affiliation before you speak. Go.
All right, so Dave Brown, Intel Corporation, and our table had 3 points that, there has to be a legal entity, and other people can expand on it if they want. We think something very important is that there be a sound bite that everybody in the room buys into and knows and can just rattle off, so that everybody has a common high-level goal, and it's very simply stated that the public can understand. And membership health, and that who's attending the meetings, who's actively participating on the positive side, and then maybe some analysis of why people are dropping out.
So thank you, David. So let's try to be at least slightly optimistic. We should probably know who's dropping out and also who's joining, because that could happen too. And I think, so I really like the suggestion of a soundbite. In fact, I'd like to have maybe one more thing too. I'd like to have a soundbite and an elevator pitch, which is, like a 2 or 3 slide thing that we could print on a laminated card and people could carry around with them to berate strangers in the elevator. So Daza, I think you may have another hand back. Oh, well, you have several hands. Wow, we have lots of hands today.
I don't know if this is working. Okay, Ben Wilson with Digister. Our table was talking about the Criterion project, or the model where you have relying parties pay a fee just to be part of the network, and then when they add on services or add on needs or uses, that's a separate transaction. So that would be maybe a model that could be then moved from that pilot to the IDESG as a whole. So that's one idea.
Well, say a little bit more about what that means.
Well, I'm not quite sure, because we didn't have enough time in that short discussion. We got cut off, so we were still debating it. And there were different views on quite what that model would be. So,
but at some level, you're talking about a fee structure for participation or something in IDESG.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Better revenue. So that's one thing that we talked about. But one of the things that I talked about with somebody else yesterday was that when you're trying to come up with money, you try to look at all your sources. And related to this concept about what kind of an organization would be formed, I don't know that it really matters if we can figure out the process of bringing in money. I'm familiar with the nonprofit, you go and you contact various donors and you ask them, would you consider contributing X dollars? And you just put the pressure on them, and depending on whether you're a peer of theirs or whether you're someone seeking that money, you know, peers have a little bit more pressure to do that. So if you had a multiple approach to that, then you get your money where you can. And U.S. government and other governments would be equal targets.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Hi, Philip Kenny with CA Technologies. We talked about, it might be somewhat of a rephrasing of bullet 3 and bullet 4 here, but what we talked about is defining a value proposition in business terminology, not ID-centric terminology, that explains the value of the trust mark that was one of the goals laid out the other day. And this would be sort of key as to why somebody would want to expend the financial or other resources required to display the trust mark.
So that's a really good suggestion, and I wonder whether it wouldn't also be a good suggestion to define the value in business terms for becoming a member of the organization that produces the trust mark, namely us.
Good point.
I think you should call on people.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Morning. My name is Russ Chung, and I'm a consultant, and I'm speaking on behalf of our table. And one thing that our table would like to see as a metric of our success is a tally of the number of credentials that comply with the standards that we are developing.
So yeah, that's a really good suggestion. You know, how many branded users do we have? Jim Elstey has his hand up.
Morning. I'd like to suggest one that maybe seem a little off the mark for success metrics from a value proposition perspective, things like that. But I think as an organization, we need to make sure that we're working fluidly and that the mechanisms of our organization are functioning appropriately. So we've spent a lot of time on rules of association, things like that. We haven't spent a lot of time exercising those processes, so I think that will be an indicator of our success when we start to, fluidly operate as an organization, do things like produce, proposals for a business entity and then go through the decision-making process associated with that. So I think we just need to exercise our processes and make sure they're working well.
So Jim, I like the suggestion, but it is not immediately clear to me how to turn it into a metric. I could speculate, the average interval between introduction of a proposal and adoption of it or something. Do you have a notion of what we would measure?
I can offer one. Go ahead. So we just had a discussion, Stazza. One possible way to measure that is this valuable exercise of polling the plenary on success metrics. We could say one metric is by the next plenary, there will be a circulated list of success metrics that the plenary would have consensus on. So one of the first things that we would demonstrate how we work is the sense of the plenary on success metrics in a way that's in relation to what the Management Council is setting as objectives.
So I'm going to repeat the observation that is a goal rather than a metric. A metric is something that you can put a number against and we can track.
It does become, I think, a function of the volume of items that the organization is deliberating and the frequency or the rate at which they are successfully deliberating those items. Okay. So, from the Privacy Committee perspective, it's the same sort of thing we've been looking at with the evaluation methodology. How quickly can we turn these around? Same sort of thing applies to the plenary as a whole. How quickly can we turn decisions around? And how many do we have to address? And we can measure that.
Okay, yeah, so volume and rate. Yeah. Yes.
So I would say one thing is about openness, and so in alignment with the Open Government Memorandum signed on the first day of the Obama administration, I think we need to have a conversation about what types of openness are important to us. So is it most important that we get overseas input or input from marginalized communities, or like where are we focused? Like openness is huge. Which ones are most important to us? Then what strategies are we implementing to achieve those types of openness? And then metrics that, based on the types of strategies, you could measure them differently, and tracking whether we're successful in those strategies and readjusting if we're not.
Yeah, I was really hoping somebody would bring this up, right? So I would be a big fan of a measure of the extent to which we're being inclusive and open, not just in terms of our deliberation process, but in terms of the breadth of the community from which we are soliciting ideas, and you know, people who maybe aren't here voting, but nevertheless are going to receive the fruits of our labors. Did you have something else, Kalia?
So we need to, after we have a strategy, we need to figure out how we're measuring the strategy. So, anyways.
So by the way, will you email Kay a link to the document that you cited at the beginning of that comment?
Sure.
Thanks.
Organizational health, membership in and out was something we spoke about, along with participation levels in committees. And perhaps we can even measure this with graphing. Like there's programs you can put mailing lists through and get fun input about the metrics in the mailing lists and stuff. Measures of stakeholder group growth, and also focused on particularly underrepresented groups and whether those numbers are going up.
Yeah, I think we had a comment on relying parties yesterday.
And also, what are the agreed norms and practices of how stakeholder representatives meet with and connect to their groups, and how are we measuring that? Are we checking in with new people and asking how they're doing before they just decide to leave? So at 1 month, 3 months, do we have a survey of asking people how they're doing? How are we soliciting input from citizens who are the ultimate beneficiaries of this? How many times do we reach out to the public? How much involvement is there? And what are the adoption and usage rates of the identity technologies we endorse?
Okay.
Or are working on?
Thank you. So, Kalia, do you have that written down so that you could give it to Kay to transcribe? Thank you very much. So I think Steve Whitlock is next.
Hi, Steve Whitlock, Boeing.
Wait, Steve, your microphone is not on. Just shake it around for a while. It will magically come on. Okay, try again.
Hello?
Yes.
Wow. Steve Whitlock, Boeing. These metrics seem internally focused. I would suggest one focused more on how much we're reducing identity-based internet fraud.
Yeah, that I like that. It's not clear that it's easy to get all of the relevant data, but I think trying to do something like that is a good idea.
No, but there are lots of reports of it going up, and you see numbers, so there must be some way to turn the curve around.
Oh, I agree. I'm just saying the thing that I think is hard to figure out is the causality, right? Because other people are also trying to reduce fraud.
Yeah, I'm relatively new to this effort, so some of this may...
Whoa. State your name.
Oh, sure. Dave Sanford, Texas Comptroller, Public Accounts. So I'm looking for trustmark methodologies, and I'd like to see some maturity in that. I'm sort of looking at the idea that there could be criteria, something very similar to security trust boundary analysis, by which we would validate use cases or solutions or other things in terms of their compliance with fair information practice principles.
Okay, thank you. Kay, did you get that one? Oh, okay, wait. Oh, so say that one more time, Dave, if you would.
Yeah, I'm looking for trustmark methodologies that are usable, understandable, published, that we could apply to both use cases and solutions, so that, and as I say, it's very similar to security trust boundary analysis, but we would want to apply these things and validate that something conformed to fair information practice principles.
And so I understand what you're looking for. I don't understand what I would count in order to have a metric.
Yeah, I'm not sure how metric, but it's a level of maturity if we have those in place, and so that's a milestone, if not a countable, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to preempt Colin for 1 second here, and I'm going to suggest a metric myself, since nobody has brought it up yet. And that is the number of times that I end up on CNN. To be clear, I think there's already press coverage that maybe the NPO is tracking articles which mention NSTIC and IDESG. I think that, that media coverage is something that we ought to be tracking, and just to see whether anybody's listening. Colin, did I steal yours? Rats. Sorry about that. You want to say it anyway? I mean, you should get on TV. Okay.
So while I would love to see you on CNN, Kim Little, while I would love to see you on CNN, maybe we make it much broader, right? That, the number of times that we have something important to make a press release about.
Yeah, so what I really mean is that we need to track the number of both broadcast media and print media mentions of NSTIC and IDESG, and we also should be tracking the number of press releases we've issued. I think we're currently at 1, so maybe that could be improved. By the way, we have maybe 10 minutes remaining in this session.
Okay, John Bickerman, Microsoft, not a lawyer, don't play one on TV, but if you go look for trust marks, they don't typically have legal status. A trust mark is basically a trademark, or an association trademark perhaps, and one thing that they have in common with association trademarks, like say the USB logo or something like that, is they're only valid if they're enforced, legally enforced. So anytime we talk about a trust mark, we should be talking about a strategy to enforce it should somebody just arbitrarily slap it on something. And I'm not suggesting anybody in this room would do that, but we got to have a strategy to enforce it. And that typically involves a civil action, which typically involves money. So there might be a ninja method to get around that. Maybe the trust mark could be owned somehow so the full might of the federal government is behind it if you infringe it, but we should be thinking this way.
I take it that this isn't just a solicitation to count how many people we sue, but also to see how many people infringe. So before you give it to Kalia, because she's had it once, Ian Dobson behind you has his hand up, and then we'll go to Kalia.
Ian Dobson from the Open Group, and this is a very relevant comment about the trust mark and how you enforce it and have some sort of contractual basis for doing so. My company actually does run a certification program for a variety of things, including people as well as products, and we certainly do believe that it only has teeth if it has enforcement. We have that through various contract situations. We've been running this program for 15 years. It's not new. In fact, it's more than 15 years now. My age is showing. But it is certainly a very important thing to have the framework for running these things properly with a legal basis based on contract. It doesn't have to be run by government or by law, except in contract law.
So, Daza, would you give the microphone to Kalia first, and then I'll call on you.
Okay. This just surfaced as we were talking. So presentations or communications materials that we develop to talk about what we do, I'd like us to actually do usability analysis with people who we think might watch them or view them, and look at the work of things like Common Craft and their videos about RSS and wikis and stuff in plain English. So working towards communicating about what we're doing and then evaluating whether normal people actually understand that before we send it out into the world.
So I like that, and I think there's even a step 0 there before we get to presentations. So one of the things that we have spoken about in the past is improving the accessibility and usability of the website, the IDESG website, and I think we could do an analysis, based on like Google Analytics or something that would allow us to see, how deep people click into the website and whether they, run around in little spirals around particular drains and stuff, and just, figure out how effective the website is at communicating what we want to have communicated. So thanks for the suggestion. Daza, I believe you're next.
Thank you. I would like to offer, as a member, a success metric, and it's a refinement of what came out with the interaction with Jim. I propose that that a metric be that by the next plenary, there be a submission for formal decision making by the plenary of IDESG success metrics, including one, what Dave Temeshok said, which is the by then hopefully finalized or then current state of the Management Council's recommended objectives, and 2, the by then concluded draft of submissions from this round in the document that's currently on the screen.
So this is a good suggestion. I will point out that it is once again a goal rather than a metric, but I think it's a good goal.
I'd like to offer the metric is whether we can measure in time and space that there's been a submission, which we've had some issues with, and that it has been there's been formal deliberation and a determination, whether consensus, vote, or tabling, and that's measurable.
So, by the way, is Paul Laurent in the room? If so, put your hand up. I can't see with these lights in my eyes. Apparently not. Is Peter Brown in the room? Okay. Yeah, so the reason for me asking both of those questions is that I agree with Daza that we ought to have a deliverable out of this meeting, and I'm trying to find someone who I can designate as a volunteer.
I volunteer.
A whole bunch of hands that were up just went down. Daza, I think we have another suggestion, and by the way, we're closing in on the 5-minute mark. Peter. Hey, Peter.
Peter.
Just wondering, so Daza had just suggested that as a result of this discussion, we should have a deliverable, which would be metrics by which we will judge our success. So I was attempting to get you as the chair of the Management Council to agree to designate a victim to produce that deliverable. Do you think that's a good idea? We have a comment online. Oh, we have a comment online. Okay, just a minute. So let's have Peter answer, and then we'll do the comment online.
Obviously, I don't know the full context, but I guess I get it from where you are. So, my apologies for turning up late. I had a business call run over. Yeah. The word deliverable sort of makes me sort of tremble in my boots, given the discussions we've been having over the last months about what is and what isn't a deliverable. I think the very minimum my takeaway would be what we've got here. Paul Laurent's subcommittee on work planning has done a considerable amount of work on, even down to the fine-grained detail about individual activities, what are the expected outcomes, and everything like that. So I think there's clearly a link there. That would be my guess would be the first element. Right, I don't have my glasses on either.
Yes, I was nodding my head, yes.
And I would say that in that discussion in the Management Council, in the follow-up work that we're going to do there, that would obviously be the starting point for where we take that on. What shape, form, or any particular deliverable would be on, and what is actionable as a deliverable here, I think would come out of that discussion. I think that's all I'd say.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if we can count on Paul Laurent to take the Management Council's input on the draft that he's already delivered and maybe put some of these suggestions into it and put it in one document.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something we can look at. Absolutely.
Thank you. Laura, we have a comment online.
This is from Peter Tapling. He says, along the lines of being able to articulate what we do, the IDESG should be able to clearly articulate how the work of the group makes electronic access easier, safer, and more private for consumers.
So I think that's a good suggestion. I will note again that sounds like a goal rather than a metric. I have no objection to goals. I'm merely trying to be clear. So we have a comment here.
Nathan Doors, University of Washington. I was just thinking on the trust mark infringements might be a metric worth counting, that if they're valuable enough for people to infringe, well, we're doing the right thing.
I agree, yes. So if it's not worth stealing, then it's probably not worth using. So I think Jim Elstey has a comment, and then maybe we'll take one more and we'll move to the next session.
Thanks, Bob.
How many trust mark infringements we detect was the suggestion? Okay, Jim.
Okay. I just wanted to go back to the 2 bullets up, the Management Council plan. I have a rather deep-seated concern about deliverables from the Management Council being seen as a fait accompli and a directive as opposed to something for consideration in the organization.
So I
just want to make sure we're very conscious that...
So the work plan that the Management Council produces and the metrics, I would presume, would be presented to us for adoption.
As recommendations for consideration.
Right. So Peter is shaking his head no. Maybe we have to have a discussion of this. Peter.
It's probably a bad moment for doing this sort of after a couple of hours on a transatlantic conference call. I'm shaking my head because I think there is in the same way I understand Jim's deep-seated concern, I think there is a deep-seated misunderstanding. When I use the word deliverable, I understand that to mean a policy product which is an outcome of this organization's work. For that, the plenary is sovereign. There is absolutely no question about that. If we're talking about working documents, things that the Management Council is using to govern and to manage as being a deliverable, it's not that I have a problem of sharing that information. It's the question of to what extent is output from the Management Council an appropriate document to be considered as a deliverable by plenary. I mean, there are certain aspects of internal metrics, for example, which we have to manage in executive session, and we will have to manage an executive session as we move to sustainment of personnel issues, financial issues, and whatever, which I don't think anyone would consider to be a deliverable that the plenary has to adopt or to approve. I'm just worried about how can I call it, scope creep beyond what is a very clearly defined, bounded set of works which are outputs from this plenary, which are a result of work done in committees, which are policies, procedures, recommendations on use of standards and everything, and what I consider to be some of it's operational trivia, some of it's important, and I would say these issues about metrics are very important. I think the thing I'm pushing back on a bit is if the plenary says yay or nay to a metric, what does that actually mean?
So let me maybe try and reframe the discussion a little bit. I don't want to be taking votes about everything that might go on. Yeah. So maybe the right way to frame this discussion is, so we've had a presentation of the work plan, and the work plan is a statutory obligation of the Management Council under the Rules of Association. So I guess the question is, having had the presentation, if people think that the work plan needs to be adjusted, people who are not members of the Management Council think the work plan needs to be adjusted, what's the procedure for getting in touch with the Management Council and having that discussion?
Sure. I mean, and one of the reasons we have the reports out from those 2 subcommittees to this plenary is that we can adjust think of that in French. I've just been working in French the last couple of hours. Ajuster la tire, as the French would say, so adjusting your fire or sort of readjusting your target. And the objective is that the Management Council should be reporting out to plenary in terms of, well, this is what we think we should be doing, like we did yesterday with Paul Lorenz's report, and we will be hearing from Kim shortly on the transition to self-sustainment, saying, these are our ideas. We, as your Management Council, this is what we think we're taking. We hold responsibility for that. Are we on the right track? Now, if the plenary comes around and says, no, you're completely wrong there, you've really got to move somewhere else, then fine. That is feedback for the Management Council to continue work on that. If ultimately the plenary doesn't think the Management Council's doing its job, then there's this thing called elections, which is where you say, you guys, you're completely off the wall. We want another crew in. It's not, I don't want us to set up a sort of artificial battle or dispute between Management Council and Plenary. Right. I'm just sort of saying we each are responsible and have to take ownership for the bits of work we're responsible for.
Yeah, I agree
if we
with
get
that.
into a situation where we're saying, well, I'm not sure we can take a decision on this because we've got to go back to Plenary, we've got to submit it 30 days notice, we've got to go through a Plenary discussion before we can actually take any action. I think that just put sand in the machine.
Yeah, so I agree
about that.
I agree that we don't want to have a series of 30-day cycles. So I guess so one thing that can obviously happen is when there's a presentation, of one of these management council items to the plenary, people can jump up in the middle of the discussion and say, "Oh, I hate that," right? Which didn't happen yesterday, right? But the other thing is, maybe we should have a methodology of posting those things like on the discussion forum and holding a period of a week or two where people can, with more consideration, submit some feedback that you can take into account.
What I'll take away, and this is a very simple, very concrete suggestion, is in the revised rules of association, we have now this provision saying the Management Council shall determine operational guidelines or operational rules for its own internal work, is that when we're going to be sort of kicking that off a bit later today, very high level without any formalisms, but we would take on board there the sort of internal rules and operational procedures that we need, and that one of the ideas in that would be to see, well, how do we formalize this issue about liaison through the committees? We have this bi-weekly or fortnightly meeting of committee chairs, and reporting into Plenary and via committees or and also through the delegates of the Management Council have responsibilities to their sort of constituents, as it were, and to say, these are the sort of things we're doing at the moment, and have methods whereby people can trigger and saying, we don't like this, or we want this reported out, or we want a decision on this. But I think it's premature at the moment to be sort of setting up. I just worried every time we talk about, let's start a methodology for that, we get into a sort of 6-month cycle of drafting documents and nobody really being sure who's in charge of what, and us ending up getting nowhere.
So very quickly, Daza and Jim both have their hands up, so brief comments. The next discussion is very important, and I want to give Kim enough time.
So very quickly, and thank you, Peter, especially coming in without the initial context. So part of the initial context, which hopefully will make it apparent that this is quite in sync with your thinking and the way you're managing things, was this metric was about a process we have within the plenary that needs some further clarification, and we need to work on it. It's our process of having a submission to the plenary, deliberation, and some outcome, whether it's consensus, vote, or deferral. And one of the things that the plenary does do in the revised rules is we also it's very clear we need to be setting our own procedures, policies, and including actually like high-level priorities. Like we ourselves also have a statement of what we think we're doing, hopefully exactly what has been recommended from the Management Council, one would think, and I believe we can expect that from the reception in the room. So this particular metric was literally that there be a submission to the plenary which starts a decision process so that by the next plenary, we have a statement of what the plenary's views are of our success metrics. And I believe that what that will be is whatever the Management Council recommends, and possibly some others, but in no way it wasn't intended or stated to dilute the prerogatives of the Management Council. It actually enshrines them. But it also has a process for us.
So real quickly, Jim.
So, real quickly, democracy's messy, it's painful, and it's slow. But that's the way we're operating this organization. That's the way this organization was founded, and the plenary is the authoritative body. The Management Council is an administrative body. And for the Management Council to suggest that they're going to make decisions unilaterally or not engage the plenary is disturbing to me.
To be fair, I don't think Peter made that suggestion.
Well, but it's,
right, so he made a procedural suggestion that it is not necessary that everything that the Management Council does be submitted for a formal vote.
But it should be brought to the plenary to bring it to our attention to make sure that there aren't objections to it.
Yeah, and so we'll take the discussion offline. So I just want to make the statement that there are a whole bunch of ways for orchestrating the feedback and decision, and not all of them are, 30-day notice and a vote. But we'll take it offline, and we will work out the appropriate process for doing this.
Great.
So it says on my script that Peter is going to introduce Kim, but I already know Kim, so she's no, stay here. We're gonna allow Peter to rest because he's had a tough call this morning. So on behalf of Peter, Kim has been appointed the chair of the Management Council Subcommittee, which is responsible for planning the transition to a self-sustaining organization. Kim Little.
So I actually think this is a great follow-up to the exercise that we've just been through for the past 45 minutes. One is that many of the things that you discussed, that you mentioned, are things I'm going to mention, so you've made my life a lot easier. And then two, Jim, specifically to you, this is a great example of a work that a subcommittee of the Management Council has started working on to update the Management Council that we're now sharing with the plenary so that you can at least know and help guide us in some of the things that we're doing. So I hope that you all see that how all those things kind of flow together. I see the clicker. Okay. Okay, so first I wanted to start out with the purpose of what our subcommittee was wrangled into doing. So the purpose of the committee is to review existing business, funding, and legal models for potential use in the IDESG. And let me step backwards, actually. At the last plenary, one of the things that was discussed was about the sustainability of the organization, how long, and at my table actually, they had the opposite. They said, how long should we be around till we are no longer needed? So people are looking at it from both directions, right? But the bottom line, it means how do we continue for some period of time until our work is done? So we were asked by the Management Council to provide a summary of the information collected so they could review and consider, because we have a lot of subgroups that do activities to keep things moving. And then to develop a set of recommendations based upon that analysis for the Management Council review and approval. And obviously, I guess I could add a third bullet just to say, and to make continuous updates to the plenary and give guidance and receive guidance. Okay, so here are some key assumptions that are really important that we want to share. So there was obviously a grant that was given, that was awarded to the Secretariat, and that is scheduled to end July 2014. But due to the expense run rate, the Secretariat may actually run out of funds by the end of calendar year 2013. The desired target funding revenue is a range. And we had a great discussion at my table a few minutes ago about that whole concept. So the funding revenue range is somewhere between $300,000 to about $1.2 million. And that greatly depends on the level of support that we as an organization need to have to keep things moving. And so someone at my table was talking about, when we look at success metrics, that all of us have other activities that we're involved in, other jobs, other organizations. So how do we keep all of those metrics moving, moving forward? And some of those do require the assistance of people like Kay to keep things moving, people like Laura, like Sudi. So we have IT resources, we have project management resources, we have a lot of free resources that the MPO puts in right now. So the funding is a range, and the more mature an organization is, probably the less resources you need. So if we were having this discussion 5 years from now, maybe we only need $50,000 to keep things going. But right now we have a range, and that's going to be a decision on the desired level of support. And then the last thing, as one of the items that came up, was a legal entity needs to be established. And we actually do have a timeline for that one, and it needs to be established by fall 2013. So we have a very short window for this. Okay, so just a quick rundown, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, but here are our business types. So we have sole proprietorships, partnerships, corporations, limited liability corporations, and nonprofit organizations. And we were looking at all of those. We ruled out the first two. So the sole proprietorship and the partnership, that's probably not a viable business type for the IDESG. But right now, until we get more guidance and feedback, we are looking at 3, 4, and 5. And we know that the decisions that are made on the type of business entity that we select, the legal entity that we select, will impact our membership. It'll impact some of the objectives of the organization. It impacts our revenue stream. So the decision we're not taking lightly, and we are definitely leveraging legal resources in that process, and we will continue to do that. I tell everybody on the subcommittee that my only legal knowledge I've learned from Judge Judy. So I do not think that that's going to be enough for this effort. But we have had great insight on, for example, what a mutual benefit nonprofit corporation is and how that may benefit us, or why we might want to choose a 501c3 or a 501c6. And our investigation of numerous organizations has also given us a lot of insight on that as well. So this eye chart is just giving you an idea of, as we start looking at the entity types, we look at things like the primary purpose, the ownership, the tax information, the management structure, and we've been going through that type of information and understanding those impacts in all of our discussions. So, before I did that, let me go backwards. I can't go backwards. Okay. Oh, no, that's okay. So revenue models. I was going to say before I showed you this, that being a Southern girl, I thought revenue, we could maybe have fish fries. You know, we could even consider a bingo night. There's a lot of ways to generate revenue, right? But obviously those things might not work, although it is Friday, and I know there's a fish fry going on somewhere in Atlanta, Georgia. Do y'all have fish fries in California too? Oh, see, you're missing out. So barbecue fish fries and a couple of peach cobblers, that could give us a little bit of money. But we think that we probably want to go down the path of member dues or fees, certifications or trust mark fees, corporate donations, federal grants, and a combination of these things. And we don't know at this point still what the right answer is, what the appetite of our plenary is. And so we're going to need a lot of help in articulating. Towards the end of the deck, I actually have a slide around, one of the things that's going to help us in figuring some of this out is being able to articulate those value propositions. So again, almost everything that you guys said in the success metrics discussion is so applicable to this discussion as well. So again, thank you so much I feel like we're on the same page. And when we start to sing from the same sheet of music, it makes things work so much better. So we looked at a bunch of business models, and so we have lots of spreadsheets, and this information, we can obviously make it available as we kind of did our research. But here are some of the organizations that we looked at. We know this is not an exhaustive list, and hopefully you'll see a bunch of acronyms that you are familiar with. But we looked at everything from the Merchant Risk Council to FIDO Alliance, to OASIS, the Open ID Foundation, Kantara. I'm just pointing out a few things. And some of them we had active participation in. Some of them we just kind of knew from other activities. But what was important for us was, as we started to look at this list and to narrow down this list as we drilled down, we wanted to understand one of the most critical things was the diversity of membership. That is something that is very different for us than many of the organizations. So we have individuals and citizens that are a part of this. We have nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, local, state, and federal government agencies. We have a variety of sizes of commercial entities as well. So we have smaller sole proprietorships to very broad tens of thousands of employees, corporations. So we ruled out some of the organizations that only had commercial entities as a part of them, or that didn't have individuals involved, or didn't have the issues, the items that we should consider because of different levels of government involvement. Another thing that people wanted to look at was international involvement. So we had a number of different things that we looked at as we tried to narrow down the list to do some more drilling down. Almost all of these organizations have websites that allowed us to get access of their articles of incorporation, or their membership guidelines, their membership fees, all of those types of things. So we looked in great depth on all of those items. And my other comment on this slide was, if you are aware of an organization that you think has a structure that would benefit us looking at, we are definitely open to taking those suggestions as well. So if you could just funnel to me, and I'm sitting over there somewhere, and anybody online, if you have an organization that you'd like us to also deeply review, I will absolutely, I see paper moving already. We very much want to take a look at those. Okay, so here are the 2, 4, 5 that we spent a lot of time looking at. So we looked at the FIDO Alliance, OpenID Foundation, Kantara, Oasis, and the Smart Grid thingamajiggy. Interoperable SGIP. And so in terms of revenue models, you'll see, hopefully, that they have very different revenue models, right? So the FIDO Alliance has a tiered membership dues based off of the level of contribution that an organization would like to give. So depending on what types of benefits that you want to receive, or the level of participation that you want to give, you want to provide, you have different financial membership fees based that way. Whereas the OpenID Foundation, they have a tiered membership dues fee structure, but it's based off of the number of employees and the type of organization. So that's 2 different approaches to that part. Same for Kantara and Oasis, and SGIP had a tiered membership by revenue of the organization and type of the organization. So not based off the number of employees, but the revenue. So even within there, that gave us some insight in terms of ways to look at revenue models for a membership fee. And that was just one of those on the list earlier. Looking at legal statuses, we found it very interesting that they all have varying legal statuses, entity statuses as well. So like FIDO Alliance is a mutual benefit nonprofit in the state of California. Whereas the OpenID Foundation is a 501c3. Kantara is actually unincorporated, and they fall under an umbrella that is a 501c6. Oasis is a nonprofit organization. It does not have, and I hope I say this right, it does not have a federal status, but it is a state entity. And SGIP is a 501c3. So all of these are very different, and there are different reasons why they made those selections. So sitting with the leadership of the different organizations and asking those details is really an important one, and we've gotten a lot of insight from that as well. In terms of the governance and leadership, they all are varied as well. So, for example, our current process for our management council is that we have our stakeholder groups elect their stakeholder representative, and they serve on the management council. We also elect a management council chair and at-large members. And so that is based not today on any membership contributions at all. Individuals as well as organizations have the ability to run for office or run for a delegate position, and also you could be the chair of a working group or a committee, and that's open to anyone that is a member of the IDESG. Some of the organizations allow individuals to be members, but individuals cannot have a governance leadership role. Only organizations can. So that's different. Others allow for there to be this elected board along with paid spots based off of levels of contribution. So if I give the organization, if my company gives the organization $50,000, I get also a seat on the board. And that varies by those organizations. So as we started to look at the different models there, we just wanted to understand what it meant, why they made that decision. And there's been some very interesting discussions there as well. And then the extent of stakeholder diversity, again, we have a very broad representation of people involved at varying levels of participation. And so we wanted to understand who was a member of these organizations and how that impacted their decisions as well. So for us, the next steps are really to focus on value propositions. We have got to start working on having some clear reasons as to why someone would want to be a member of our organization, as to what the benefits are, as to, we were talking about why people join, why people leave, and that's exactly why we want to understand, that piece of it. Oh, that's not the other one. It's okay. So I had another set of slides that also had some other questions in there, but we can ad lib and just work with comments and questions that you may have. And I guess as I'm waiting for questions to start, we also looked at very clearly the benefits that were laid out by many of the organizations, and I would say all of them were very clear about what you get for your membership. So if I am a membership at level A, I have the ability to attend committees. I have the ability to vote. I have the ability to actually, I say the right. I have the right to vote. I have the right to attend committees. I have the right to use the organization's logo on my organization's website. They were very clear about those types of things. There wasn't okay, if I pick level A, am I able to do this kind of thing? It was really, really clear. And then also, they did varying degrees of a job to be able to articulate those value propositions.
So as part of the thinking that should have, in my opinion, gone into your assumptions about working on value propositions, I think we need probably take one step back even, not that members, why valuable to join, but what is it that this organization are going to produce? So, that perhaps needs to be work in progress, but ultimately, we need to articulate clearly the kinds of work products that are expected or planned to be out of this body. Because to me, there's sufficient confusion there still. Thank you.
Agree. And that's, again, how all of these things work together. So that the presentation we had yesterday about our work items, helping to understand what we're trying to ultimately accomplish and understanding clearly our success metrics are all going to help that.
Ben Wilson with DigiCert. One of the organizations or types of organizations that you didn't include was a World Treaty Organization.
Say that again?
A World Treaty Organization. That's all I have to say. No, that's World Trade Organization. I'm saying treaty, a treaty. Any United Nations, any kind of United Nations type of entity, anything that's you create the legal structure and then you have each country adopt it. There's also another option, which is a federally chartered organization that hasn't been discussed either.
Thank you. I think Ian in the back.
Hello, Ian Dobson, the Open Group again. I'm here with several hats on. One was representing my Jericho Forum and Security Forum in the Open Group. The other is to represent my organization, which is the Open Group. I was encouraged to see that the Open Group was listed among the 12 or 15 organizations on one slide, but didn't appear on the more detailed one, which actually does provide all the facilities that you listed in your short list of 5 or 6. I'd be delighted to talk to you about that. It actually meets all the criteria that you listed as what you're looking for. With my with my Open Group hat on, I'd love to talk to you about it, Kay.
Thank you very much.
This is Daza speaking as a member. First of all, this is excellent work. Thank you for sharing the draft as it exists so far in the analysis. 2 things that would be worth looking at as you keep iterating this are one of them is the match back to the at least initial assumptions of the type of body that we sought here, and then crosswalking that to where the options are. We may want to keep those assumptions, or we may want to change some of those assumptions. But if we did a direct linear extrapolation, we'd be looking at a subset of the overall ones you scanned and really focusing on some that are missing, which would be membership organizations. So the American Psychological Association, for example, or AARP, and there's a whole range of them that have really different metrics, and that would be similar to carrying forward the idea of the plenary is an important part because to have a cross-boundary identity ecosystem, we wanted to have a broad deal, and that was sort of the governance was part of the overall NSTIC deal, and how would we extrapolate that forward? Or perhaps maybe we don't want to. There's a decision there, but that would be one missing part. And then the other, just 2 quick ones, is maybe take a look at NACHA. And we've had, when I was with the states, a lot of success dealing with their governance they call it emancipated councils. And with the Electronic Benefits Transfer Council, they actually split governance of rules and then governance of operations of programs. And it's a sophisticated model there that I can give you links to and contact people to look at the bylaws. So those are a couple of more iterations. And again, just thank you for the work to date.
Thank you. And I'm going to step down for 1 second real quick.
We got your slides.
Oh, thank you.
And we have an online question.
Okay. So let's go ahead and do the online question, and then we'll go to the next person.
This is Deborah Diener. This is a very important issue, so thanks to the subcommittee. I have 2 questions and recognize that the first one may be premature. 1, has the subcommittee begun to thinking about the specific dollar amounts for the various membership levels? For example, people participating in their individual capacities versus individuals who are participating on behalf of an organization, parentheses, corporate, educational, nonprofit. And second, which body, the Management Council or the Plenary, will make the final decisions about the fee levels that are ultimately adopted? Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. So in terms of fee structures, we have not tried to come up with ours. We've just looked at the existing fee structures and then tried to apply that to our membership to see what that would look like. So say, for example, excuse me, we wanted to understand, okay, we have X number of individuals that are part. The individual membership fee based off of those 15 plus organizations that we looked at range from $25 for an individual member to $1,000 for an individual member. The corporation fees range from $1,000 for a corporation to $50,000 to a corporation. So what we started to look at was, okay, if we apply and I'm just going to pick one, the Kantara model, and we applied that to our existing organizational demographics, what would that look like? So we've broken out every one of those of our members and said they fall into a government entity. They're an educational institution. They are a state government, and then said, okay, this is how much money if we chose a membership fee structure. And I'm going to keep saying if because there have been no decisions made at this point. We are in the investigation mode, knowing that we're going to have to ramp up really quickly if we're going to meet that fall 2013 requirement for us to be a legal entity if we want to continue to have organization and continue to move forward. And then in terms of deciding if the management council or the plenary makes a decision, I have no say in that. I am a subcommittee of the management council that is here just to provide guidance to the management council, and I will defer to all of my my two colleagues that have higher pay grades or levels than me.
So I'll just say that Peter and I will outline the process that is used to decide on this, and we'll have that discussion probably initially online and then here at the next meeting.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, and then I'm going to actually go back to the slides just for 1 second. Go ahead.
Okay, real briefly, Dave Sanford. So there were a list of revenue sources that were discussed, and it seemed like we... Okay, yeah. It seemed like we moved from those revenue sources fairly quickly to the membership material, or the membership source, membership fees. And this is sort of a follow-on to Kenny's comment, is that I think that while all of those revenue sources are probably valuable, maybe use them all, my idea is that if we were clearer about what the product was and we had revenue based on that product, it would drive us to get to a product quicker, I think.
And, yeah, okay. It was Jim.
Jim Barnett with AARP. I want to follow on what Daza said a little while ago about AARP. What we think about as AARP is actually a C4. It does a few things that were not mentioned here. One is you can do advocacy, education, outreach, and also importantly, lobbying. If this group is truly successful in the long run, we're going to be bumping into some very successful business models that currently exist, some of which have been in the news in the last day or so for their lobbying efforts. So it's just something to think about, and there's actually some revenue behind that as well. But also, it's not an either or. AARP is a C4. We have a C3. We also have a for-profit subsidiary as well. So you can actually have a collection of organizations that work together to generate revenue.
Thank you. So I'm going to just take 1 second to step back on a couple of slides that were skipped over in the other deck. So slide 4 now actually has the legal entity establishment steps. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page of the things that we were looking at. So one of the things that we were first doing is starting to determine the revenue model and the source, the types of organization that would fit within those things. So for example, if we all of a sudden we're going to start focusing heavily just on trust mark revenue generation, it might change the revenue model that we select. Or if we're trying to do heavy contributions from donors, it might change how we approach things. Determine the state for incorporation, develop our articles of incorporation and bylaws, and on that one, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of work that was done to create the rules of association for the IDESG. So we're trying to heavily leverage that versus trying to reinvent the wheel. Nobody wants to reinvent the wheel. We have to file incorporation documentation with the state office. We have to sign and return our incorporation certificate, and if applicable, file for tax exemption status with the IRS. So those are the steps that we're looking at. And again, we're trying to look at that and have that done by fall of 2013 if possible. Go ahead.
I was curious if there was... Oh, sorry, Jim with the NSTIC NPO and a member of the Communications Committee. If the Communications Committee has been kind of looking at this task of being a part of business plan and sustainment in, for example, recruiting members at various membership levels and so forth. So thinking about what Bob just said about the timeline for completion of elements of this and the fall targets, it, of course, is great to continue discussions at the next plenary, but if the comms committee is going to get busy and start recruiting, do we need to be more aggressive in deciding on the membership levels and numbers and targets by the July plenary, if not sooner? I'm curious, what is the realistic time frame for reaching conclusion points between now and fall, rather than I'm just curious if there's specifics available on where that's going to be.
So I can answer your first question, not necessarily the second one. And so the involvement of the Communications Committee is actually a great, again, I think I planted all of you all in terms of questions. And when we have our breakouts, there's going to be a communications breakout. We are moving the business plan afternoon breakout to the morning. There's another open room, so we'll have those updates for you. But in the beginning, what we're going to do is combine our session with the Communications Committee to start that dialogue. This will be a chance for us to, because one of the things is, as we look at the organization counts or the different organization levels that we have. So if we have 200 individuals and we have not many educational institutions, how can we encourage more organizations to join? Is one of the things that we're looking at from a communication standpoint, right? So where we have any gaps or how do we get more large corporations to be a part, or whatever the issue is, those are the kind of things that the Communications Committee focuses on heavily. And to Kalia's comments earlier, making sure that we have the materials that are targeted to specific individuals' audiences, so that way we can speak to them and to their needs and communicate effectively, which I'm apparently not doing.
I'm aware there's at least 4 members that would like the floor, so perhaps you can let us know the sequence. Could everyone raise your hand that I saw? 1, 2, 3, 4.
So, yeah. So let's start in the very back.
Hi, Eric Skase, WW Pass. So when I looked at the projection for costs, there was quite a wide range between $300,000 and $1.2 million.
Yes.
And if I look at today's list of organizational members, it's in the order of magnitude of about 300 organizations. So doing kind of a temperature test, given that money is going to be needed long before we can charge for trust frameworks and certifications and so forth, in the first year out the gate, it looks like we're probably going to be asking corporate members on average for something in the order of magnitude of $2,000 apiece in order to keep this organization going at a moderately funded level in the lower end of that range of numbers. My question is, of the people who are here from organizations, are they willing to pony up that kind of money before the end of the year? And if a significant number of organizations drop off, those numbers are going to escalate for those who continue to survive. So my question is, we're here in this meeting, we have some rough numbers. It seems like it would be valuable to just get a kind of temperature test to see whether or not people have the stomach for $2,000, $3,000, or $4,000 a year membership fees for the first year or two on average from a business to continue to be a member of this organization.
Or 10, 15, 20, 50. No, I'm just saying, the only reason why I say that is that there are many companies in the room that are members of many organizations today of varying price points. And so, not that I think that we need to charge more than $1,000 or $2,000. I don't have a plan for that. But I really don't want to, I would say, how many organizations do we think would be willing to possibly pay a membership fee? Because I don't want to put a number on it yet.
But my point, Kim, is if $2,000 an organization on average is not something we're willing to stomach, then we've got a major problem.
So Eric, I think actually just asking the question so that people have it in their minds to take it home is as useful as asking people to raise their hands. I think that was a really useful question, and it's useful even in the absence of a public answer.
That's right. And on my slide 11, actually, the 2 questions that I wanted to pose to the group were, what are the top reasons why you and or the organization you represent are a member of the IDESG today? because you signed a membership agreement, most of you in the room. There's new people, and I'm thankful that you're here. But if you are a member, why did you sign it? And then what will be required for you and or your organization to become a member of, well, if I had this correct English, of a self-sustaining organization. So what is needed for your organization or you as an individual to join the self-sustaining organization that might have membership fees? Next question, please.
Hi, so Dan Chenok, and my hat is Policy Committee Chair. Can you go back to slide 10?
Yep.
So most of the benefits there are what I'd call organizational benefits, why it makes sense to join, what you get as a member of the organization. One of the issues that we'll be talking about in our breakout that we've been talking about for a few weeks now and with some members of the National Program Office as well, are benefits that a company might make in making an ROI calculation to answer the question that was asked before, what can you get by becoming a member? Are there things like policy safe harbors, protections from some sort of legal issues, which would all take a lot of thought and advocacy, et cetera, working with stakeholders in and out of government. But I think that examples of membership benefits ought to also think about ROI for companies externally to come in and join, and we'll be talking about those. If anybody wants to join that, we'll be in the Milpitas room, I believe, for our breakout.
Thank you, and that'll be a very important conversation. The examples that I have listed up here are the ones that were derived, again, from the organizations that we were looking at. So I just wanted to kind of at least plant the seed of the way that many organizations were looking at that. However, I think having some of those more tangible benefits will be really important. Next question.
Jim Zock, unaffiliated. It seems to me that based on Eric's question, one of the next orders of business of the Outreach or Communications Committee ought to be considering, I'll even agree with Kalia on this one, is a survey of some description, taking some of the things off this chart and your previous two questions to get a sense of the temperature of the population and report back to both the plenary and the Management Council.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, to be able to get to the bottom of these two questions is going to be really important. Go ahead.
Thanks. So let me frame my question up a little bit, because I'm rather optimistic that we will generate revenue off of our trust marker accreditation process in the not too distant future. So fundamentally, we're talking about bridge funding between now and that date. So I'm a little concerned that membership fees and changing the structure of membership agreements and asking organizations to pay these fees as a bridge funding mechanism seems mismatched, right? Because we go through a lot of work, we get people doing that, it's hard to stop doing that. Is there consideration for other alternatives like corporate donations or, bake sales or whatever, the fish fry you suggested?
I'm telling you, fish fries are good.
Hey, I'm all for that. Bridge funding is the operative model here, because if we can get the bridge funding, get to the point where we have our trust mark, get to the point where we're generating revenue, we don't need membership fees and all the trouble that comes with that or some of these other options which are less than palatable.
So let's get Jeremy to respond.
So I would say, based on conversations I've had just in the last 36 hours, the question of whether this organization is in fact going to pursue something around accreditation and trust marks that involves this organization collecting significant amounts of revenue is actually something that's very uncertain. And it's very unclear whether that is going to be the model that stakeholders are actually going to buy into. So without passing judgment on any of the different ideas that are out there in terms of how this organization could transition into something that's being self-sustaining, I think it's a tricky path for folks to start going down in this room right now to make the assumption that you're actually going to have enough support. My personal concern is that it's not yet clear that a business case has been articulated to some of those companies you'd actually want to collect those kinds of dollars from to pay it, and there are other models that are out there that may make sense and may get more stakeholder buy-in instead. So I actually think at 10:15, when the accreditation, trust framework, and legal committees all meet to start to essentially recharter, or recharter is the wrong word, but that's part of what's going on, but sort of reinvigorate those activities. There's going to need to be a vigorous discussion within different stakeholders here in this organization. Where is there going to actually be support? And so I think it is
I just wouldn't want anybody to go into this discussion assuming that there is, in fact, going to be that model.
So, real quickly, process point. We're at time. I'm going to ask for two more questions. One here, three more questions. One here, and then Peter, a last word. Perhaps not. So, two more questions, and then we'll wrap up and move on to the next.
Thank
session.
you, Brian Russell. And this is more of an observation than a question. So it seems to me that the major beneficiary of the IDESG is consumers. And it seems to me that in order to gain the kind of traction that we need in order to generate revenue from trust marks and such, that we need to relay a clear message to the consumers so that they can then drive the relying parties. So it's a top-down approach, or I'm sorry, a bottom-up approach.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure that everybody remembers that the revenue model examples that we had laid out, there is no preference for any of these. We have not said that we're selecting one. That's why number 5 is a combination or others. So just want to make sure that's clear.
Hi, I'm Phil Wolf. I had a couple of quick questions. Did you look at international incorporating someplace else than the United States?
We have not at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have you looked at doing a quick and dirty incorporation so we have some not-for-profit up in like a week or two so we can start actually having a place to direct money, and then we can fix what the perfect incorporation is in due time, but we can actually start asking companies for their donations or memberships or whatever now?
On that one, we have. So we've looked at how you just, go to incorporateme.com. I'm just making up things. But, we have looked at that as well.
So
let's do Judith, and then we have to wrap up. Well, we don't want to make a decision. We don't want to make a rash decision in general. But we know that is a back pocket scenario if we needed to do it that way. But we don't. But we really do have. We have enough time right now to deliberate, to talk about it, to understand. And so if we get to like the last second, he doesn't agree that we have enough time. But I think that making that decision today is not one that we feel comfortable doing just yet. Put it that way. Last one.
I guess we could also say from governance, we're comfortable to the extent we've discussed it that the pacing is appropriate, and you can always get requests. You can always indicate who's willing to pledge in a good way, and then make sure that you've figured out the type of corporation and governance at the right time. The corporation doesn't have to precede a pledge of money, although it does have to happen quickly.
Judith.
My comment is kind of an agenda comment based on the last conversation. I just want to point out that I think it's unfortunate that we have the Communication and Outreach joint meeting with the Business Planning Subcommittee at the exact same time that the 3 committees that are joining around accreditation and trust frameworks are at the same time, and those 2 conversations influence each other. So I don't know if there's anything we can do about it today, but...
So we, as usual, had a series of conversations around arranging the agenda, and there's only so many hours in a day. In the future, as usual, we will try to adjust things, but this is the best agenda that we were able to put together. So let me. So first of all, thank you, Kim.
Thank you. And I just want to thank all of you for your comments and feedback. This is definitely a group effort in terms of trying to figure out the right way to do this, and thank you so much for your comments.
So I'd like to make 2 requests here before we wrap up this discussion. So this matter is going to obviously be coming back before you. So Kim, I would like to ask if you could put these a link to these slides and a solicitation for feedback into the discussion forums so that there is a default place for people to come back to you with suggestions and you want to say something?
Yeah, so I have another comment too. The stakeholder groups, that's the perfect place to get some of this feedback going, because I think being able to get the different perspective of the diverse groups that we have. So we're going to be working in the Management Council to figure out how to funnel comments from the stakeholder groups to your stakeholder representative so that we can also make sure that we get that very narrow approach. I don't want to treat all corporations the same. I don't want to treat all, the viewpoints. So I think that being able to leverage the stakeholder categories is a great way to get some feedback going.
And you'll also put an item up on the forum? Thank you. And I would like to make the same request it's actually not clear who I direct this request to, but I'm going to direct it to Paul Laurent with respect to both the work planning deliverables and the metrics discussion that we had this morning. So, Kay, if you could work with Paul to get a discussion item up in the forum so that people can provide explicit feedback on these items. So with that, I do want to keep us on schedule, and we're only 5 minutes behind, which is actually pretty good. So now I'm going to call Colin Suter up to the stage to take us through a discussion about terminology. I'm confident that we'll get to the break on time because I don't think Paul has ever, I don't think Colin has ever gone over at any of these events.
Sounds like a bit of a threat there, I think, so I will try and keep this on track. The clicker is here, I guess. So I'm going to present an overview of some activities that have been going on around terminology within a couple of places in the organization. Former boss of mine who I worked for in Texas used to always say it's so much fun giving a presentation on someone else's behalf. I'm not quite in that position, but in about 45 minutes, Adam Madlin is taking over as the chair of Security Committee. So along with Kathy Tilton, who's the chair of the Standards Committee, I'm sure they'll welcome a lot of dialogue and input today, perhaps some new contributions, continued activity. So, let's have an active discussion. So this presentation really, it came out of the last plenary. There was a joint meeting between the Security Committee and the Standards Coordination Committee. And we talked about terminology, and as you might expect, there was a presentation. Wynne Bailey's stood up and bravely stood up and proposed some definitions for terms. There was a lot of active discussion around those. It's quite challenging, as you might expect, to move forward on those activities. I guess the one thing that I noted out of that, and there's at least a couple other people in the room that were involved in this as well, that there was an activity that started in about 2002 to form an international ISO subcommittee on biometrics. And so I served as vice chair for the U.S. Technical Advisory Group to that for about 3 years or so. And one of the activities that came out of the ISO committee was there were five working groups under that subcommittee, one of which was dedicated to vocabulary. And they did a wonderful job. They took on the concept maps, which I know Peter has suggested for this, and it's a great tool to get very clear, succinct, accurate definitions. The problem was it took them about 3 years to do that, and in the meantime, the other working groups had advanced their work items. So one of the biggest concerns, I guess, that we felt was expressed throughout the committees of security and standards is that there's not a disconnect. And some of the underlying core terms like functional model and then terminology, functional model, pulling those out of the use cases, we felt was very important to try and get that underway. So the work we're presenting today really is on the basis of that. And this work, to be honest, has gathered a lot of steam and momentum very recently. We've been hosting bi-weekly meetings. So it came out of the Security Committee. I guess, as a group, we said, okay, so what are the 6 top terms from a security perspective that we'd like to have definition on, we'd like to have clarity on? Because at that point, we'd already had a couple of meetings with the Standards Coordination Committee. And so we basically, as you see there in the second bullet, the Security Committee came forward with 6 terms to the joint meeting with the Standards Committee. And we wanted to come up with candidate definitions for these 6 terms, present them to the plenary for consideration. And frankly, we've done that on 4 terms. But there's going to be a big caveat slide that I have up in the 2 slides or so that talks about the understanding that, these are up for discussion, and I'm sure that this is an ongoing process. So the main purpose of today really is to socialize the activities that are going on, invite people to come along, participate. We've actually had very active participation in this already. The meetings have consisted about 30 to 40 people on the call every 2 weeks, of which I'd say, at least a dozen are fairly active, vociferous, so it's great in terms of seeing the momentum building up around these terms. So these are the 6 terms at the bottom that were chosen as the first items for consideration, and candidate definitions were trying to be drafted for these 6 terms. I think the intent is to tackle more complex situations like data promiscuity. We're going to get onto that later, but I think these are the first 6 terms that we're going to address initially. So this is the caveat. This is the understanding as we're going through and we're defining or coming up with candidate definitions for terms. There was a lot of debate around how do we differentiate between what is being proposed by a member that is publicly available, unencumbered by copyright, can be put into as a candidate definition, maybe refined by the group, versus something where we need to get some clarity on copyright, right? So one of the things that we ended to focus on was things that were known to be unencumbered by copyright. For example, the NIST special publications, 863, FIPS 140. Those were a couple of the publications that were looked at for candidate definitions. But the group was very clear that wasn't intended to be the sole sources for definitions, and we understood that there's a lot of other sources out there. In fact, you'll see on a couple of the definitions that are proposed, one of them is from ITUT, and I think the current understanding on that at this point is that it's publicly available. It's not entirely clear yet that it's copyright free, so we need to just make sure that the appropriate copyright permissions are granted if applicable. But again, we kind of came at it from a focus of what we knew to be available for use and consumption, so that's why there was a bit of more of a tendency to use the NIST special publications, for example. Again, the spirit here is really just trying to move the ball forward. There's nothing like actually putting a line in the sand to get people to then come to the table, refine those suggestions, make progress. So there's no intention here that these are the final definitions, but they had been agreed upon, as I said, from a fairly significant portion of the Security and the Standards Committees, and they actually represent, I would say, a large proportion of people, that are actively working around such terminology issues, not to exclude others, and certainly part of this process is to invite others in to help contribute. So the places that we've been discussing, as I mentioned, it's a joint security and standards coordination call. It's held bi-weekly. The next call is next Thursday between 12:30 and 2 Eastern Time. There's also been discussions on the listservs, and typically people are responding back out from the notes of the meetings out to the 2 security and standards listservs. I note here, just for interest, the first 2 terms that were defined, attribute and authentication, I saw about 16 comments as follow-up to that. The next 2, identity and identifier, 54 comments in over 2 days. So, you can sort of see the momentum building up and people are getting more actively involved. I'm sure the next 2 terms are going to generate a whole bunch of comments as well. And that's part of what we wanted to discuss here today, present to the plenary in terms of opportunities for moving forward. So the other goal here is we've been having these discussions, and again, it's in the spirit of, moving the ball forward. It's a very vibrant group and getting the discussion going within that joint committee activity. But we also, of course, need to, to make sure that is documented as we go forward too. So the wiki was established as a means to do that. I would say that a lot of the discussions to date have occurred on the listserv. They've not yet been collated onto the wiki. We understand that that's a step that we would need to go through as we go through this process. But there certainly has been strong discussion and consensus around the definitions that we're presenting. So here's the proposed definitions to date that have gone through. And again, you can see, for example, for attribute, I won't read it. You can read the screen, but it's modified from SB 863. I'm trying to remember. I think it was mostly rewording, to be honest. It was to do with where the claim was made was the suggested change. But I mean, it's kind of around what the change was. It was modified by the joint committees. Again, there were about 30 people involved in that particular call. The next topic was authentication. Around identity, as you might expect, there was a lot of debate, and out of that call emerged a preferred definition along with 2 alternates and a definition for identifier. So we can come back to this slide. I don't, and we have 30 minutes allocated for this. What I'd like to do is get to the sort of intended next steps and process, and then perhaps open it up for discussion in terms of how we move that forward. And we can always come back to the slide and go over these definitions. But again, It's more about broadcasting where this work is taking place, trying to invite people to engage in the process. And I would certainly hope that at the next plenary, there will be a list of terms, more than 8, I would certainly hope, that will be proposed for approval by the plenary. Now, to get to that point, we've got to go through the steps that I'm going to suggest here. There may or may not be a step that needs to go through in terms of the Privacy Committee in oversight. That was a component that was discussed on the last call. It's not clear whether this is a work item that would go through the Privacy Committee as per the rules of association. So that needs to be just, I guess, discussed and figured out. But the next steps, as I see it, is plenary discussion. So again, we can chat about the next steps. We can also chat about the proposed definitions as they currently stand. I think a very important aspect of this, as all of these efforts, is assigning an editor with clear responsibility to collate the comments, do comment disposition, propose the next version of the term, and then move that forward. I think without that iterative process in terms of coming up with the definitions, we're going to have a lot of great ideas that are getting thrown out as comments to proposed definitions, but it's hard to actually make progress and refine those. So assign an editor would be an important part. Working through the definitions, we'll continue to do that, work through the list. Need to just make sure that everything's unencumbered by copyright. Again, we think that all the sources, we certainly know that the NIST sources are not, they have no copyright issues. We just need to clarify with ITUT. There was an ISO reference there as well. I guess we're trying to separate between publicly available versus no copyright, because some of those vocabulary documents tend to be available because that's the way that they were structured. Do call for comments, resolve comments, as I said. I think the next couple of steps as well is, provide these definitions to other committees' work items. Now, this sort of goes back to the comment that I made at the start in terms of trying to make sure that things are synchronized between the committees and the work on the vocabulary. The worst possible case is that there's an isolated group goes off, comes up with beautiful definitions for terms, but it's overcome by events. So we're really trying to avoid that. So there's obviously got to be very clear communication between the different committees. And as I mentioned halfway through, there may be an extra step in there in terms of coordination with the Privacy Committee, whether that's having them engaged as we go through this, or whether it's the finished work item. Probably it would be the former, I would think, would be the way that we go through. So again, the original goal when we got together about 8 weeks ago, it was very ambitious because we only meet every 2 weeks, was really to have terms to propose to the plenary for acceptance. Obviously, there are steps in terms of notification and so on, getting it on the agenda that were not able to be proceeded or processed. But the activity has really picked up a lot of steam in the last 2 or 3 meeting cycles. So Bob felt that this was a good opportunity to at least brief people on the work and again identify where the work is taking place, so that we can bring in extra participants. So with that, that's all I wanted to brief out at this point, and certainly open to questions.
Thanks, Colin. I just wanted to add a couple of comments, and in that sense, I'm speaking more as an individual member of the Standards Committee, albeit not very active in the last couple of months for different reasons, rather than any position on Management Council. I wanted to underline your point about, the example from ISO. You go off for three years to define stuff, but then, events have moved on. I think that's important for 2 reasons. One, and I can't remember who said this, I think it might have been Kalia or Judith in one of the meetings, but it was actually very valid, was the discussion about the terms and the concepts is actually as important, possibly more important, than nailing down a particular definition. If we're saying as an organization we're not necessarily a sort of standard setting body, coming out with a deliverable of approved terms may not be necessary. I just put that out as may not be necessary. But what is necessary is that very detailed discussion about the concepts and what we imply by using a certain word. And I think we've already seen that in discussion around, for example, around identity or identify or authenticate, that the discussion about different people's understanding of what those words mean have been given very, very valuable insights in the discussions about, oh, okay, if you're coming from that perspective, then I understand why this is a problem or why we might be able to get somewhere. So it's a sort of way of helping reduce the sort of dialogue of the deaf, where people are just totally misunderstanding each other. And in that sense, the process of discussing the concepts, and there I'm using the word in the sort of very formal sense, the thing that we're talking about, and the fact that we use certain labels for those concepts, disambiguating that and having that discussion is as important, if not more important, than coming to final, a definitive conclusion on the actual definition of the term. That said, the reason we want to get to some conclusion there is that we're having a coherent debate within the organisation, that these terms are the words we're using in a particular way for the purpose of this organisation. If other people use a term in a different way, that's fine. Mileage may vary. But what we want to be able to be sure is that we've eliminated or reduced to a minimum the ambiguity or lack of coherent discussion because we're getting wrapped around the axle about what we actually mean by a particular word. And I think that's an important issue.
I think it's a very good point. So we have 3 people in the queue. Just a very brief response. I mean, personally, I think that it's probably more important to be 70% correct on this than 100% correct. And maybe we should say we don't strive to be perfect in this, right? Because if we do, we'll get wrapped around the axle, and we'll lose continuity there. So.
Hi, Jim Fenton from OneID. I want to make sure that we consider the context of the documents that we're getting these sample definitions from. I've got a particular concern with some of the definitions from SP 800-63, which primarily because that's one I'm most familiar with, that addresses a set of government use cases. It's a document applicable to government use cases. I think the authors would acknowledge that it doesn't necessarily address, in fact, there's even some comment in the introduction, that it doesn't necessarily address the kinds of use cases that NSTIC addresses. And I want to make sure that we don't end up with definitions that are inappropriate just because they came from a convenient place.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jim. I mean, I think, to be honest, in terms of the discussions on the calls, the group was... how to phrase it, so terrified of the plenary in terms of that interpretation that, this is the caveat that we try to capture at the group. I think everybody was very clear that 863, again, as a source of material that could be used that's publicly available, was a good starting point. Now, both of the terms, I think, that came from 863 that were shown up here, I believe both of them were actually modified by the committee, too, in the context, to Peter's point, right, for this actual committee. So I'm not even sure, even if we're citing a source, it's a source for attribution and it's a source for recognition, but I'm not even sure, and we can maybe, when we come to actually do this, we can do a red line to show it was really taking the words and then, putting them in the way that the IDESG, at least the committee there, saw fit. If I'm going to come to Kenny just in one second, but one point that I didn't make in the slide, and Bob's just come back. I mean, one thing that we might want to consider, so the Security and the Standards Committees have taken this on because we just felt it was the right thing to do, and again, we wanted to do it prior to other work items going too far. Ultimately, it would seem that this is more, obviously, a plenary-wide discussion. It feels that still the right environment is the Joint Committee right now, but everybody's invited, right? I mean, it's not just the Security and Standards Committees. Anyone can come along and participate, but, Bob, you may choose to put it out, then maybe it should be elevated to a plenary-type activity. That's a consideration. You want to speak to that?
So I would prefer, to the greatest extent possible, for work to be done in the committees and to be then brought before the plenary for potential discussion and adoption. So I think the right thing to do is to take Colin up on his invitation that anybody's welcome to participate and do the work in the committee, and then we'll get updates. But my usual experience is that if you try to advance a work product in a meeting of 250 people, you lose certain efficiencies.
Thanks, Bob. And mission accomplished. I managed to extend an invitation on behalf of Kathy and Adam there. So,
it's Kenny Kwan, AT&T. I'd like to very respectfully disagree with Peter. I think that we are in danger of confusing, and this is classical within standards where you should know a lot better than me, confusion about definitions and requirements. I would ask that all of you to consider the 7 level stack, add another social contract, social interaction on top of the for S purpose. What we're dealing with is really low down in the technical behaviors, trying to get some common understanding of what, as engineers probably are talking about, and be able to relate that to system design, authentication, all this. Ultimately, we need to do some accreditation testing. Without some clear, commonly agreed terms, we don't know what the heck we're talking about, right? So respectfully to the concern about the spin and Kalia and others that might be put by the technocrats on these meetings, this is not the intention. There should not be any concern about that. I think that you should take those debates as requirements and policies and let the technical discussion go on. I mean, we're like building the car. We're talking about nuts and bolts right here for these terms. When the protocols or preferred solutions are explained and designed, you can impose requirements on top and make sure the concerns at that level are met. Thank you.
Colin?
Last one. Colin Willis, individual. There's sort of kind of some back chat going on in a Skype session here, so I'm really sort of representing a group of views. Not looking at anyone in particular, but sort of hymns to my right. I'm not sure. While I think that what the joint committee is doing is great, but it seems sort of quite a narrow scope. There are some implications about the standards, the organisations that you choose definitions from. Let's assume that you're one that's going to choose a definition or work from a base definition of that's already defined somewhere. And the rationale for that is that there's strategic implications if you choose a US standard versus choosing an international standard. That was one of the rationales for putting in the ISO standards, because it's associated with the WTO as a treaty organisation, and that gives you the kind of leverage which I think, when one's mind is expanded about where the IDESG business, the scale that we get going here out to an international front should take us. So we've got to be quite kind of conscious of those strategic implications that are going on in the choice of the organisation from which you base the standard.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point, Colin, obviously. And I think, so partly, the goal, as I said about 6 weeks ago, was to come up here and have definitions, notwithstanding the inability to meet the timeframes for agenda notification and so on. I think also the reason that we backed away from that a little bit is, we started with a blank sheet of paper, much as we did in August, and people threw up darts onto the paper. And in fact, the first few that were thrown up there were, 863 was one of the first ones that people spoke to. And we actually decided, or we discussed as a group, should we not move forward with that because people might get the impression that we're only looking at 863? And on the other side, people said, well, that's ridiculous. Like, let's put something down, and then we'll discuss it at the plenary. We're showing where the avenue for discussion is going to be for future. And, of course, copyright is a consideration, too. Some of the ISO documents, obviously, are copyright. Not to say that copyright permission wouldn't be granted from them. So, that's a consideration that we would look to going through. But, again, this is really just in the instance of people willing to put out first contributions and then word them. I personally certainly hope that there'll be a lot more contributions from other, not only sources, but brand new stuff off the top of our heads in terms of IPR being generated by this organization. So I think there was definitely a recognition that there will be other contributions forthcoming, and this would be a good way to try and flush those out, let's say.
So I'm going to preserve Colin's 100% on time performance by concluding the discussion now on time. It's time for a coffee break. Once again, sponsored by Dayon, so I'll encourage you, if you have further comments, to refer them to Colin. We resume in 15 minutes in the breakout session rooms that are indicated on your agenda for the committee meetings. These will continue after lunch, also in the second round, and then we will reconvene to hear from the Privacy Committee. Thank you very much, Colin.